All right, so now we've explored groupings, and we understand how we can use groupings to abbreviate our expressions, and we can also use groupings to grab sub-pieces of data that matter to us so that we can pay particular attention to those data. But what if we wanted to go a little bigger than this? Right now, we're just grabbing all of the IP addresses, and the IP address belongs to a single record, right? There's one IP address per record. But what if per record I wanted more information? What if I wanted the IP address and I wanted the date in the form of day, month, year? Well, I want you to try that first. Go ahead and write the expression that's going to capture the IP address as well as all of this information right here, the day, the 2-digit day, the 3-letter month, and the 4-digit year. I'm not worried about the time, just get that far, okay? Pause the video and try to write an expression that will grab both the IP address and the date from each record in this file. Okay, now you've tried capturing the IP address and the date for each record in this file. And maybe at first, it wasn't as easy as you thought it might be. For example, your instinct might be, okay, well, here's the IP address, and after the IP address, I'm going to want a digit that occurs twice, and I'm going to want a / and remember, / are special characters in REGEX. How do we handle that? Well, we gotta escape it, right? All right, cool, so I want a / and then I want 3 letters. How do we do letters? Well, if we go over here to our common tokens, remember, letters are just word chars, basically. So we want to have 3 of those word chars, followed by another / and then followed by a digit that occurs 4 times. Now, notice if I remove my IP address thing, you'll notice I've got the right pattern to capture all the dates, and it only captures dates from what I can see here in this file. But that's not what we want. We want the IP address and we want the date. So if I put the IP address back in, notice nothing matches. Why does nothing match? Well, because what we're saying is we're looking for a pattern where the IP address is immediately followed by the date. Notice that if I get rid of that divider, all of a sudden, yeah, I've got a match. I've got one match because I've got an IP address followed immediately by the date. But that's not how this file is organized. It's organized by IP address followed by this separator and this enclosing character before we ever get to the date. When you're performing regex pattern searches, you have to match first the entire pattern of everything you're looking for. In other words, if I wanted to pull each of these records individually, I would have to write an expression that matches all of this pattern, matches all of this record, and treats it as a full match before I could go through and pull the individual items that matter to me, like the IP address and the date and perhaps other components that matter to me, like the URL. So first step is we have to match everything from the first character we want to the last character we want. So let's go up here into our pattern. Adjust this pattern. If you haven't done this already, pause the video and adjust this pattern to match everything that's currently in gray in this file. Go. Okay, so how did you do it? Well, let me show you my trick for doing this. If I know that this pattern is already correct, and I know it is, and if I know that the pattern I want for the date is already correct, and we know that that is, all I have to do is get the part in between, copy it, and inject it right in the middle. Oh, but why is that bracket red? Why is that? That's right, because that opening bracket is a special character, so we've got to escape it. So once I escape that character, notice now we're getting full matches. Look at the full match. The full match is now the IP address, the separator, and the date. Pretty good stuff. But I want the IP address, and I want the date. And I want the device ID. I still want that in there. But I don't really care about this intermediate separator. I don't really want that. I want it to match, but I don't care about that part of the data. When it comes to I know which parts of the data that I want, but it's part of a bigger set, when that happens, now it's time to use our groupings. Okay, so here's the groupings that we need. We need a grouping for the IP address. we need a grouping for the device ID, and we need a grouping for the date. So pause the video and get me these three groupings for every record in this file. Okay, so how did you do it? You know what? You do it one step at a time. Let's start with the IP address. What part of this pattern represents the IP address? Well, everything from the very start to the very end of our IP pattern, right? From the very start of our overall expression to the end of our IP pattern, that's our IP address. So I surround that in grouping parentheses. And notice over here, it gets its own grouping, which is very useful to us later. This allows us to treat this IP address on its own, even though it's part of a larger match. And previously, we had already grouped our device ID, and notice that our device ID still appears as its own group, group number 2. Perfect. So how do we get the date? It's the same principle. Find where the first character of the data that you want begins. And in this case, it's the first digit of this repeating 2-digit pattern. So after the opening square bracket, but before the digit, we're going to place a parenthesis. And it's red because it needs a matching parenthesis. So at the end here, after our final repeated 4th digit, we want to go ahead and put the closing parenthesis. Notice that gives us group 3, and group 3 is our date. This is hot, right? Now we have a full match per record where we are plucking out the IP address, the device ID, and the date as separate, distinct pieces of data. This is going to help us down the road when we want to work with that data individually.